Okay, let's discuss the challenge now before Mr. Carney. Happy to have on the program right now the former Deputy Prime Minister Anne McLellan, co-chair for the Coalition for a Better Future. And thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure.
So,
pleasure.
So Mr. Carney will be taking over for the Prime Minister sometime soon, expected to be sometime this week. But, you know, this transition is happening while we're obviously in the midst of a pretty brutal trade war. Does that put us at a disadvantage as a country?
I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. First, most of the key ministers are in their jobs, and while I cannot predict whether they'll stay in their jobs in Carney cabinet, if I were to guess, I would say that those key ministers will probably keep their jobs. So what do we see? We see Dominic LeBlanc going with Doug Ford on Thursday to meet with the Commerce Secretary. The Minister of Finance, Dominic LeBlanc, has been involved in this file from the beginning. Probably Melanie Joly will continue to plan for the G7 meetings. She will continue to talk to Marco Rubio, her counterpart. Francois-Philippe Champagne will continue to deal with his counterparts, and so on. So that's one thing, that we will probably have the key name actors and their relationships with their counterparts in the U.S. remaining strong. The other thing is people need to take on board the fact that with Mr. Carney, you have got someone who has dealt with complex, difficult, unpredictable situations and people. He dealt with that issue in 2008 and beyond with the financial crisis when he was governor of the Bank of Canada and worked with Jim Flaherty and Stephen Harper and others. And of course, in the lead up to Brexit and during Brexit, where Mr. Carney made it quite plain as the governor of the Bank of England, he was opposed to Brexit. And again, a very difficult time for the United Kingdom. But what you learn from these events is how to deal with unpredictability, how important relationships are, building those relationships, how important it is to be thoughtful and calm. And I think you see all of that in Mr. Carney.
So, and I hear what you're saying, in a detailed CV when it comes to leading in turbulent times. But is Mark Carney an elbows up kind of guy who can meet Donald Trump, who is a leader that does not follow rules of decorum?
I have never played hockey myself, Michael, but I know that Mr. Carney, I think his favorite game is probably hockey, and he talks a lot about hockey. And I would think, even though he was a goalie, where perhaps you don't have your elbows up quite as much as you do in the corners, I would say that Mr. Carney's a fighter, and that Mr. Carney is not going to have any trouble both getting his elbows up and keeping them up when it is appropriate. But of course, you also need someone who is calm and thoughtful and knows when it's important to put the elbows down and actually, be more thoughtful, get away from simple sloganeering. Mr. Carney is the antithesis of what I call frat boy sloganeering. He's thoughtful. He's been tested in some of the difficult times that countries have faced globally. So I have no doubt that Mr. Carney has the determination and the steel to do what is necessary.
So in terms of a mandate, though, now that we are entering these talks this week, the fact that Donald Trump is not holding back on his threats, the fact that we're facing tariffs on steel and aluminum tomorrow, and by the beginning of April, another round of tariffs for the United States, how quickly do you think Mark Carney will actually pull the plug and go to the polls to get a mandate?
Well, that is not for me to decide, Michael, as you can imagine. So I am not going to opine on when Mr. Carney might decide to go to the public in a general election. I think there are lots of rumors out there that speak to the fact that the House will not come back on March 24th and that the election will very likely be called between today and March 24th. But look, I'm just reading what the pundits and others say. I have no inside track on when Mr. Carney is going to call the election. But if I were a betting person, which I'm not really, Michael, but if I were a betting person, I think it's going to be sometime between today and March 24th.
Okay, so keeping an eye on that, and I appreciate the fact that you don't want to opine here, but I do wonder, will Mr. Carney run as a Liberal in Alberta? You've done it, you've succeeded in the past, you're both from Edmonton. Do you think this is what we're going to see Mark Carney running in Alberta?
Again, I don't know. The one thing I would say to Mr. Carney and the people around him is that Alberta is a very difficult province for any Liberal to win in. And I would also say that dealing with the tariff situation with the United States, obviously, Mr. Carney will have to work with all 13 provinces and territories, and certainly Premier Smith has said some things that might give me a little bit of pause in terms of where she might come from in the coming weeks during an election. And of course, if you're the Prime Minister of Canada, you need, regardless of where you run, you need to be thinking about those relationships and how you sustain and maintain those relationships, because we're going to need them all in the weeks and months ahead. So my bottom line, it's up to Mr. Carney, but Alberta's a tough place for a federal Liberal to win.
And yet you have in the past, Anne McLellan, so good
yes.
words. And thank you for that. I appreciate the time this evening.
Thanks, my pleasure.